into the Smithsonian, and he's effectively now has some random person deciding what is appropriate for the Smithsonian to teach in terms of American history, things that don't offend parts of the MAGA base, right? So we're now literally reviewing parts of American history and parts of American culture to make sure it comports with Dear Leader and what the MAGA
Can we address
wants.
some of those things that are in there? Because have you looked at some of the things that are being reviewed?
Yeah, slavery was a bad thing that we could talk about.
Okay.
Like,
he's not whitewashing slavery. So
he's not?
He's not. No,
okay.
He's not. And you cannot tie imperialism and racism and slavery to just one race, which is pretty much what every single exhibit does. But let's talk about the fact that when you look
at slavery,
let's talk about the fact.
Slavery in America was.
Do you realize that only less than 2% of white Americans owned slaves?
But it was a system of white supremacy.
You realize that slavery is thousands of years old?
White people were
Do you know
the slave
who
owners.
was the first race to try to end slavery? Well, what's controversial?
I'm very surprised.
This is an extraordinary exercise in historical revisionism.
I'm really surprised.
Do you realize that?
Jillian, I'm surprised that you're trying to litigate who was the beneficiary of slavery and who was not.
What I'm trying to tell you is that
in the context of American history,
okay.
In the context of American history, what are you saying is incorrect by saying that it was white people oppressing black people?
Every single thing is like, oh, no, this is all because white people bad. And that's just not the truth. Like, for example, every single exhibit, I have a list of every single one. Like, people migrated from Cuba because white people bad. Not because of Castro. Yes, no, it's in there. That's what I'm saying. You don't actually know what's in there. Do you know that when you walk in the front door, the first thing you see is the gay flag?
Jillian, you have a lot of stuff in front of you.
Yeah, I do,
what
because
exactly
I don't, because here's the thing.
Are you talking about?
Okay, I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please.
There's one called Change Your Game, right? This has been an installation there. Is gender testing fair in sports? Does that, and then it goes on to talk about how it's complex to do gender testing in sports. It's not complex. It's basic science. That's untrue. It's XX chromosome, XY chromosome. That's sports. Is it fair to have biological men competing against biological women in sports? No. But why is this in the Smithsonian? So it's been completely captured.
First of all, I don't.
And it's totally partisan.
First of all, we don't have time to litigate all of this.
Of course we don't, because then you're going to lose the argument.
No.
Everything is racialized, just like you're trying to do to me now.
Excuse me.
It's like, I can't believe you're trying to suggest, that slavery
just to
is
be
a good
clear,
thing.
you brought up race.
No,
this was a conversation about the arts, and you brought up race.
It isn't.
You brought up.
But the whole point of this is that the issue
you brought up slavery, and you brought up the question of whether. You brought up the question of whether or not slavery in the United States is about race. The answer is yes.
Of course. I did not say
in the United States
don't
is
straw man my
about
argument,
race.
because that's not what I said.
So what are you
brought
talking
up
about?
Slavery. And what I was talking about is that this isn't really about that. When you make every single exhibit about white imperialism when it isn't relevant at all, that is a problem. So when you're talking about Cubans leaving Cuba and you make it about white people bad, that's not accurate.
Can I just say, zooming
that's
out,
my point.
All right, we're going to move on.
I was saying on the arts thing, I think why this is.
Wow. Okay. Well, quite a debate there. This is really a hot topic, of course. Right now, the Smithsonian is under fire because the Trump administration wants museums to stop presenting what they call divisive narratives about America's past. You can see in this video that there's division over the past and how we interpret these things. And you can see that most of the CNN people are hook, line, and sinker apologists for the progressive interpretation of the history of American slavery. When you start looking into it, though, it's a lot more complicated than what we have been taught. It's still a horrible thing, but there's a lot more detail and a lot more going on here. So with the Smithsonian thing here, people who don't like it are calling this government censorship in an attempt to sanitize history. But here's the truth. For decades, progressive academics and activists have been scrubbing inconvenient facts out of the historical record. They just don't talk about them. They don't bring them up. They have their mythology, and they don't want anyone to question it. And the real facts don't fit this simple morality mythology of white oppressors and black victims. So let's see if you've been told the whole story or not. Most of us were taught a flat, one-dimensional story. Evil white men enslaved innocent Africans, and the Civil War ended it. Full stop. But history is never that complicated, or never that simple. It's much more complicated. And the real story is much more interesting. Once you dig into the history of slavery in America, you will find details that undermine the narrative we've been fed. For example, did you know that the transatlantic slave trade itself was driven in part by African kingdoms like Dahomey and Ashanti? They captured and sold other Africans and sold them to European traders. I was always under the impression that the Europeans showed up, they went inland, they attacked, they gathered up people, they enslaved them, they put them on their boats, and they went off to America. Now that's the simplistic kind of thing. No, what's really going on is that there's tribal wars happening in Africa. African tribes are defeating other African tribes, and then they enslave the tribe that they defeated. And so this is going on all over. Some of these tribes are taking these people and they're selling them to the Arabs, and then eventually selling them to Europeans. The Europeans are just giving them money and things like that and taking the people. They're not actually going in and rounding up the people and kidnapping them. They're buying them. The Africans are the ones kidnapping other Africans and selling them. So the African elites grew rich off of this. And their societies were complicit in perpetuating the system. Did you know that? Did you know the first man recognized as a slave owner in what would become the United States was not a white man? In 1655, Anthony Johnson, a free black man in Virginia, won a court case to keep John Kaser, another black man, as a slave for life. That was the first legal precedent for lifetime servitude in America. Did you know that? Were you taught that? Did you know that by the 1830 census, 3,775 free black people in the United States owned 12,760 slaves? About 1.5% of the free black population. Many owned slaves for profit, just like white owners. Some became wealthy planters. For example, did you know? Have you heard of William Ellison from South Carolina? He was born enslaved, freed in 1816, became a prosperous cotton gin manufacturer and planter, and owned 63 slaves. Have you ever heard of Andrew Durnford from Louisiana? He was a Creole sugar planter who owned over 70 slaves. Or have you heard of Marie Therese Metoyer from Louisiana? She was the free black woman who owned extensive property and slaves in the late 1700s. Did you know that? Have you been told that? Did you know that in some parishes of Louisiana before the Civil War, free blacks owned more slaves per capita than their white counterparts? Did you know that Native American tribes like the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Creek also owned African slaves? Some even brought them on the Trail of Tears with them. Not only that, did you know that Native Americans not only owned African slaves, but also enslaved other Native Americans and white settlers? And when slavery was abolished, they didn't give up their slaves. That was a whole nother thing they had to do to get them to stop. Did you know that Great Britain banned the importation of slaves in 1807? Did you know that the United States was the second country to do it in 1808? That was the earliest year that the Constitution allowed. Did you know that? We didn't fight the war until 1863. 1808 is when they banned new importation. Did you know that at the height of slavery in 1860, only about 1.5% of white Americans owned slaves at all? The vast majority of whites had no direct economic stake in slavery. Did you know that? Have you heard of any of these things? I wasn't taught any of this stuff. Now, it doesn't mean that it makes slavery okay. It doesn't mean that a bunch of white people still didn't own a bunch of slaves and that it was a horrible, barbaric institution that definitely needed to be eradicated. It's just this is a fuller picture of what was really going on. And did you know that today slavery still exists in places like Mauritania, Libya, and other parts of Africa? History is really much more interesting when it's not when it's not just wrapped in a mythology perpetuated by progressive elites and academics. This is a fuller picture of what we've come from.